is an operations and growth leader who has spent her career stepping into companies at their most critical moments and turning chaos into clarity. Rebecca has led organizations as both COO and CEO in the healthcare space, scaling team, building systems, and driving performance across operations and strategy. She is someone who just designs strategy. She builds everything needed to make it real.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, I want to start how you have been into this journey building strategy for the companies, and you have worked as a COO and a CEO. So, from where it started and how is it leading today?
I did not start my career set out to do operations by any means. I started actually doing HR and then transitioned into operations. I kind of fell into operations. I've always been I like to build, I like order, I like process. So that always came very naturally for me. However, I tend to be a little bit different than the typical operations COO, as in I'm very outgoing. I am an extrovert. I was always told I talk too much. So I kind of didn't fit that mold. So I think that part of me didn't initially decide to go into operations because I didn't really feel like I fit the mold of a typical operations. However, I have learned that as you get older and wiser, you can be anything you want to be. Yeah, I have enjoyed my journey. I love helping companies. And so here I am today.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So, you've worked in multiple industries, healthcare, real estate. So, what are these different companies, these different industries look like in terms of operations and processes and strategy?
Yeah. So there's always the basics of operations that you can easily transfer between any industry, right? There are so many things like, SOPs and just your regular process that doesn't change overall. However, there are nuances with each industry that you have to learn. Real estate is kind of a beast of its own. You're usually working with a lot of 1099s, and having process that 1099s have to follow is a little bit different than having process with your W-2 employees. So you have to learn how to make it so that everyone wants to buy in. I think that's the biggest thing, is that you need employees to want to buy into the process, because otherwise you can have a fancy process, and if nobody follows it, what's the point? So it is definitely learning in which industry, who you're working with, what type of people, how they work best, and making sure that you design process that works with people, but ultimately is good for the company.
So, you mentioned about processes, SOPs, right? So, what is the starting point to create any SOP and how to make it acceptable by the people and that should be followed throughout the organization? So, what are your experiences around it?
Yeah, I think that the first thing you have to do is you have to observe. I am very observant. I am very detail oriented, and I always pick up on little details. So I think that that's really important to start out. See what people are doing already. This is, of course, if you're not in the brand new startup mode, but just observing, seeing how they go about their day and looking to find holes. And by doing that, you can tweak process, you can create process around that, but also seeing how people engage and then building a process that makes their lives easier. And on top of that, you have to sell the story. You have to make sure that they have buy-in to what you're doing and they're excited about it. Because if they're not excited about the process, they're not going to engage into it.
What differences have you found when there was no processes versus there were processes within the company?
Ooh, that's a great question. When there is no process, in a way, it's easier because you get to start from scratch. You get to define process and get everybody on board from the beginning, which is always, I think, an easier way to do. When you have already defined process and you tweak it, a lot of people hate change. Actually, most people hate change. I think it's like 85% of people don't like change. And so trying to get people to change and go and start a new thing is really challenging. So that is going to be your biggest differentiator when working with no process or trying to change process.
All right. So when things are tough or things are changing fast, right? So how
Mm-hmm.
to deal with those situations with the team? We need to upskill them as well. We need to make them adaptable to the new
Mm-hmm.
challenges. So if you will be in such situation, what will be the first thing you will gonna do in order to handle that situation well?
I think that getting people, like I said earlier, on board is your biggest thing. So getting people to not only believe in what you're doing, but believe in you. And I think as leaders, that is one of our main objectives. And to be a leader, you need the people to follow you and they need to be excited about it. If you can't get people excited about what you're doing, you're never going to get people on board.
All right. So as a CEO, what is the biggest responsibilities they should own?
As a CEO, vision and direction for the company is by far, I think, your biggest responsibility.
Okay. And suppose a company with no vision and no direction, and
Mhm.
versus a company with vision and direction. So, what's the difference between both?
There's a lot of differences. I think that companies with vision and direction execute very well. They have success and usually leaders as a whole, as the company, whatever industry they're in, they tend to be leading in that industry. People without vision, that I see that over and over and over again. A lack of vision, a lack of clarity. People are stumbling. They don't know what they're doing and what they're working towards. And that makes it very hard on employees and the company as a whole, right? You need to know your vision. You need to know, be clear about your goals in order to get to your vision. And so I do find that that is over and over again something that companies struggle with.
What is a biggest responsibility of a CEO?
Yeah, COO execution. You take that strategy that the CEO has come up with, that vision and strategy, and it is your responsibility to execute it. And so that's a huge responsibility. I think a lot of times people see CEO over COO. I find that they tend to be kind of at the same level in a sense because they both carry a ton of responsibility, just different sides of the coin, so to speak. So definitely executing well on the strategy. But if you don't have someone who has good vision and strategy, you can't execute well. And if you don't have somebody who's great at execution, your vision and strategy means nothing. So those two roles are so important that companies get them right. Because if you can get those two roles right, you can have a lot of success.
Like, could you share what are the reoccurring challenges that many companies find difficult to resolve because you have worked in multiple organizations? Or we can take one example, for example, your current company, right? So, what will be the things which you want to resolve and in your mind that is creating challenge for you?
Yeah, I would say, as a consultant and an advisor for different companies, again, it's so funny because you really do see the same things over and over. Despite the industry, everybody struggles at the core of this one thing, and that is usually the strategy and the direction of where they want to go. And so I see it over and over again. And for me, the hardest thing, I think, where I sit is getting them to realize that that's the biggest issue. And then once they decide, like getting everybody on board with it, because oftentimes you have two people, three people in leadership, and they all have different ideas of what the best idea and strategy is to take. And so getting them all on board, I think, is one of the key challenges that I face in the work that I do.
Now, as you mentioned, advisory, right? You also advise to many companies. So,
Yeah.
how an advisor, come into a role? Because this trend I have seen, like recently, like earlier, people were engaged, they were into the board of directors with different
Hmm.
areas, but now it is getting widely accepted across the
Yes.
organizations and across the things. Does an advisor play a role in any company and how it can be beneficial for?
I think with everything in life, sometimes when you're too close to something, you can't see everything, right? So being able to take a step back or having an outsider's view, I've seen it's happened over and over again. where somebody in the leadership has said to me, "Oh, I didn't even think of that," or "I didn't even see that," because they're so close. So having that outside view can really change and help a company, because again, when you're close to something, sometimes we just don't see it. So having a second pair of eyes that is not in the day to day can be incredibly beneficial.
In your life, what has been the hardest moment and what lesson you have learned from it?
The hardest moment and like the different jobs that I've encountered, I would say probably where there has been misalignment of expectations without a firm foundation. I talk about it a lot with everybody that I work with and in all the jobs that I've worked. If you don't have a firm foundation, what you are building will eventually crumble. So having a firm foundation is so necessary, and having the right expectations, right? Everybody wants to have a firm foundation, but you can't just have one. Like it just doesn't happen overnight, right? There are steps that have to be taken. And a lot of time, visionaries who are usually the CEOs have a vision and they want to see it come to life immediately. And that's where operations comes in and helps them align and say, yes, I want to be there. I think this is a great role, but here's the things that we have to lay out first. Because if we skip these couple of things, then we're never going to rise and grow. So making sure that foundation is built strong is, I think, the number one key and the biggest challenge that I have faced throughout my career.
That's amazing to know.
Yeah.
How you have overcome that challenge by letting the leadership know that this is what is needed and we need to first build out the plans for this rather than focusing.
I think too, like it's really hard to get people who are super excited and again, visionaries to slow down, because they tend to be just so like on fire for what they're doing and so passionate about it. And so it really is oftentimes you're butting heads because you're seeing what needs to be done in order for that vision to come to life. And like I said, it's usually not as quick as what the CEO or visionary is hoping for. So finding common ground so that you're both comfortable can be really challenging, but you just have to keep at it and keep working to make sure that you guys are on the same page so that you can build a great company.
Mhm. And what is the one achievement which you want to share, which you are very much proud of?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's like a particular achievement. I do think that one thing that I'm super proud of is the environments that I've been able to create. I talk a lot about leadership and how important it is. And I really love to foster. And I have this concept of leadership that multiplies. And I really think that raising up other leaders underneath you is by far the greatest legacy that you can leave. And for me, being able to see younger professionals and see their growth and the things that they've been able to accomplish and the leaders that they've become today would by far probably be my biggest achievement.
All right. So last question I have it for you is
Sure.
you mentioned the start is the strategy, right?
Yes.
CEO creates the strategy, leadership team creates the strategy. Then comes the COO, which help in executing those strategy.
Yep.
That strategy we need to execute by certain processes, right? So we create the
Yep.
processes. So this is the first three steps we do, right? So what
Mhm.
are the latest steps and how to measure it? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, because a lot of times people don't track success. They don't use, you know, KPIs and those types of things to measure where they're at and how successful they're being, right? If you don't have data, how are you going to see where you're at, where you should go, where you should pivot? So having data is incredibly important, both internally and externally. So I encourage people to have those KPIs set for their teams, and also externally, like what does success look like? Make sure that you are defining that, because if you don't know what success looks like, you're going to fumble. And so that is one thing that is super important for all leaders to be able to figure out from the start, so that they can accurately look forward and back and say, did we do what we wanted to do? Were we successful? If not, let's pivot. Let's try something different. That way you don't stay stagnant, but you keep moving forward.
That sounds great. I mean, because once we understand this process is working fine, this strategy is working fine, we can make a little bit tweaks in that and then
Yes.
iterate it. So that is also the power we will get once we measure it, right?
Yeah. And I think setting out, and a lot of people do this, I see, like they set out with a vision and they execute it and they're rigid in it. They don't want to make any changes because they believe what they set out is correct. And that can often be what you set out is correct, but things change, right? Industries change, the way we do things change. And if you're not willing to constantly reassess the process, right? At least once a year, every leader needs to sit down and reassess their process and ensure that it is getting them to where they want to be. Because most of the time, you are going to need to constantly tweak your process for just the outside changes and make sure that you still have a strategy and process that aligns with the vision and the goals of the company.
Absolutely. If you want to give me any example around like this step by step, four things we talk about. One is
Sure.
a strategy. You can take of any example of any strategy, right? So can you give me a step by step example how we're gonna do it? So it will be really helpful for all the listeners to go into that direction and start implementing that way.
Sure. So let's say we'll take a basic strategy of we want to get 100 new customers. I'm just going to make it something you can do across most of the industries, right? Okay, so 100 new customers next year. Great. That is the strategy. How are we going to get those 100 customers? If we can set up, I enjoy the EOS process of like rocks and setting goals. So our end goal is 100 customers. What is it going to look like to get to 100? Let's set, what do we want in 3 months? What do we want in 6 months? What seems like a reasonable goal? Okay, so we lay those out. This is our 3-month goal or 6-month goal or 9-month goal or 12-month goal. What needs to be done to get to the end goal? So in 3 months, what does that mean? We need, 400 outreaches. Out of those 400, what do we think that we're going to get from that? Okay, maybe 10%. So 10% of that, and like build that way, break things down into measurable goals. That's how you set a good strategy so that it's easy to execute upon because you'll be able to see from start to finish what that looks like. Again, CEO can say, I want 100 new customers by the end of the year. Great. Now the CEO needs to come in and see how are we going to get to 100? What's that process going to look like? How are we going to value that and execute that to make sure that we hit our goal?
They lay out the plan that this is the plan, and then the
Yep.
team they execute that plan, and
Mm-hmm.
CEO and COO measure that through the success they have it for like every month, every
Let's say every month, right? You get to the end of the month and your first goal is like out of 3 months, right? This is what we want to accomplish at 3 months. So at 1 month, you assess where you're at and you say, oh gosh, I don't think we're going to hit that 3-month goal. Like, what do we need to do so that we can? So that's where I talked about earlier. You're going to have to tweak your process as you go. So you figure out something we're doing right now isn't working. Let's try X or let's try Y and see where we're at in next month so that we're constantly getting closer to the goal and we're catching it soon enough. So there's always like not giving something enough time or giving it too much time. It's a very fine line. You have to figure out the balance of those things, but that's why having regular check-ins, keeping track of data is so important because then you can assess as you go along and tweak and change so that you don't fall behind.
it is super clear now.
Great.
Step by step plan. So amazing.
Yeah.
I think that is all I wanted to ask today. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I know the listeners will gonna take a lot from this conversation, and they're gonna start planning
Fantastic.
for next.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.